Kevin Rudd, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you, Patricia.
There's no sign of tensions waning between the two countries. The Prime Minister's latest comments won't help. How have things been allowed to get this strained?
I think what we've had is a triumph of short-term political interests in terms of Mr Morrison's government, as opposed to the long-term national security interests of Australia. If you are prosecuting a serious national security agenda on the question of next-generation submarines, then there are professional diplomatic channels through which these matters should be dealt with. For example, there should have been formal correspondence between Mr Morrison and President Macron, outlining the reasons why this contract from Morrison's perspective could not proceed, providing the French with appropriate notice, and then secondly, in my judgment, given the nature of the changed tender, that is, nuclear-powered submarines as opposed to conventionally powered submarines, to invite the French, together with the British and the Americans, to participate in the tender. That's what proper professional diplomacy would have led you to do. This has been run, however, as a short-term political exercise, I think, mainly to have a wow factor in Australian domestic politics, and it's all come radically unstuck.
OK, the leaking of private text messages with the aim of shedding a different lights of events. I want to get your take on this because the Prime Minister is saying there is no way the President didn't know the scrapping of the contract was a possibility. It looks like, based on that text message from Macron, that that's the case, right? I mean, if he's asking, is it good or bad news, he obviously knows that bad news is possible.
The bottom line, Patricia, is the continuation or the cancellation of a $90 billion submarine contract is not to be the stuff of text messages. That's why you have formal correspondence between heads of government on matters of such fundamental importance to both countries. And that's why we've got this rolling ambiguity about who said what when. If Mr Morrison was serious about this, let him produce a letter that he wrote to Mr Morrison, to Mr Macron, prior to his public announcement of the so-called AUKUS arrangement, and again explain why he wouldn't have invited the French to participate in a re-tendering, given the French are capable of providing nuclear-powered submarines as well. Had that been done based on normal, professional, diplomatic advice in dealing with matters of high national security involving our country, the French and the United States, then frankly we wouldn't be in this extraordinary mess we are today, where we've now got heads of government effectively leaking against each other in order to establish what transpired in these informal text messages between heads of government.
Do the Prime Minister's comments hold any weight that the President ought to have known? Did the Prime Minister go far enough to advise France?
The whole purpose of something as complex as a large-scale nuclear submarine replacement program is that it cannot simply be condensed into, a cryptic message by text or a personal email. That's why you have formal correspondence between governments. That's why you have diplomats. That's why you have an ambassador in Canberra for France, an ambassador in Paris for Australia. These are the formal channels through which major decisions are considered, deliberated upon, taken, or in this case, cancelled. That's why we're in this mess. And it seems that not only have we had this initial problem with France over the way in which it's been cancelled in the first place, that is the submarine contract, Mr Morrison is now digging an even bigger hole for himself, not just in relation to the French, effectively himself accusing the French president of lying, but also extraordinary background briefing about the failure, in Mr Morrison's view, of American officials to properly apprise the United States president of the nature of the cancellation of the French deal. And so with all these, as it were, backgrounding efforts, what we now have is a far worse set of diplomatic consequences in terms of Australia's good standing in Washington and Paris, and our good name as a reliable global international partner whose word can be trusted.
What needs to happen now to at least begin the process of repairing the relationship?
I'm not a personal friend of Mr. Macron. I've met him once or twice. I noticed what Mr. Turnbull has said, who actually did the original deal with the French in placing this order for 12 conventionally powered boats some years ago. And so Mr. Turnbull has advanced the idea that at a minimum, Mr. Morrison should consider apologising to the French for the way in which this has been handled. I would also recommend this as a serious public policy alternative for Mr. Morrison. Given everything that's happened, accepting that the advice is real, that you do have to make this transition from conventionally powered boats to nuclear powered boats, and I still haven't seen that advice, but let's assume it's accurate, then the way to repair this relationship is then to invite the French to re-tender. That is, the British to tender, the French to tender, and the United States to tender. And under those circumstances, not only would you maximise best money for value from the Australian taxpayer's point of view, you would go some way towards repairing the relationship with the French. I would think that is the most mature, sensible and wise course of action at this stage.